Fair enough. Jenny, we heard about all the factors influencing your generation, all the negative factors, overwhelming advertising, media culture that promotes materialism. The fact that incomes are diminishing, and that means that people don't have time to look at the bigger issues. Where do you find your motivation among all that kind of environment?
So as a student and while watching this documentary, 3 big factors came into my mind, and they were attitude, skills, and knowledge. And first, just in terms of attitude and the attitude towards youth and the attitudes that youth have. I mean, this summer in August, I was in Sacramento lobbying for a bill at the governor's office, and this bill, Senate Bill 1422, was a bill that requested that we respect student voice and give them a chance to give feedback to their teachers that's completely confidential and stays within the teacher. And when I met with Paul Navarro, the chief legislative director, and told him what the bill was about, he buried his head. And with that kind of attitude, as a youth, I felt very discouraged. And I think the attitude towards youth being that youth are incompetent or that we are apathetic is very discouraging. But at the same time, when you look at the skills and knowledge that we do have, in terms of knowledge, I have probably 90% of my friends who can't locate Greece on a map. And as sad as that is, that's the reality of it, and the knowledge that, you know, even though we know the current events that are going on, we're once again faced by this overwhelming fact of this is such a huge issue. How am I as a 17-year-old, as a 15-year-old going to attack this? And the exact same mentality as I had before going to my first CAST conference was, how am I going to solve poverty? And I think it's this issue that also affects my attitude as a teenager. It's such a huge issue that I can't attack it, which is something that this documentary really highlights. And that's because we don't have skills, which is the last thing that came into my mind. And the reason that I am as active as I am now, 3 years later, where beforehand I was just a student, you know, with this banking method of learning, depositing knowledge into my head and reciting it back out. The reason why, you know, I had such a drastic turnaround was because I was given the skills. And as I was given the skills, the one person who's influenced me to become an activist said that, you know, the opposite of war is not peace, the opposite of war is creation. Not doing bad isn't doing good, not doing bad is doing nothing. So with that, he started, you know, through this organization of CAST where we emphasize training students how to do things. That's when I realized that, you know, I can attack poverty. I'm not going to solve it in a day, but if I'm given the skills to do it, my attitude's going to change. And the students I work with are doing tremendous things before they're, you know, legal to do anything else. And that's because they have all 3 factors of attitude, skills, and knowledge. And I think that's something that this documentary really emphasizes. And I mean, just looking at the audience, I mean, how many people here are less than 18? And I think students really need to see this and realize that we do need all 3 things.
Hey, Jenny, who gave you this skill? You said you were given this skill.
Conference from CAST, which is why I got so deeply involved, called the Youth Action Summit of California, where we're attacking global issues and breaking them down into a thing called a project planning era, where we're actually taking home a concrete plan.
Awesome. First of all, that's incredible. I think that's incredibly heartwarming to hear, and that's the beacon of hope that we all need. You know, I think, you know, one of the things that Jeffrey Lerner from STS9 really instilled was about accountability. And I think once you know, that's something that we sort of promote in this film. We don't say it outward, but, you know, critical thinking, in that once you start really, you know, taking that knowledge, and as you described, comes a concern and a care for the world. And that's, you know, something that we really promote, and that really comes with, once you start getting that concern and care, you can't help but want to get out there and become, you know, more of an activist, more of, you know, somebody who's socially and politically conscious and wants to do good for the world. So I mean, I commend you. That's awesome. That's incredible. Thank you.
Your organization, Courage Campaign, I think it's all about promoting critical thinking in the youth. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, the Courage Campaign is a multi-issue progressive organization, so we understand that people aren't necessarily brought to a movement or brought to take action because of the exact same thing for each person. So, you know, we work on marriage equality, we're working on repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, we work on things in California governance, things about human rights, things about making sure people have access to health care, education, a lot of different kinds of issues. So one thing that I kept being reminded about when I was watching this film was we just recently saw Proposition 19, the effort to legalize and tax cannabis here in California, come very close to passing just this past election. And one of the main things that Courage was involved with was helping to motivate action and activism, on college campuses. And on the campuses where we organized, we did things like polling places ran out of ballots because we had so many students who were there voting. You know, they went to vote for Prop 19, but they voted for the rest of the issues that were on the ticket. So I think one of the main things for especially engaging with youth is to find what are those things that are important to us as youth, you know? It's not just about the war in Iraq, this big war. It's about, you know, my cousin and your brother who are out there, you know, on the front line. So really bringing it home to folks in terms of what does this mean to me personally in my life? And I think one of the really nuanced things about this film is that it really talks about our relationship of sort of protecting our own abilities to self-sustain versus a larger vision of a community that you know that's sustainable in that way. So so that's really what Courage is involved with, is helping people find that, you know, thing that brings them to the movement, and then to give them, like you said, the tools and the skills and knowledge to be able to move that forward.
Excellent. Back to the filmmakers. Are there certain assets that this generation brings to the table in terms of making a difference that previous generations didn't have?
Absolutely. I think, you know, it's one of those situations where it's not to say, again, there are amazing movements happening. There's a lot of stuff we're not hearing about. I think even technology has its place. While, you know, signing a petition online may not be, you know, it still serves its purpose. Obviously, it may not be the easiest connection, but technology is where I found out how to protest on last March for an anti-war rally. So obviously, there's so much stuff happening in terms of social networking, in terms of getting the word out there, that our generation has uniquely found and created and will then harness into the next generation. But I think that it's also, yeah, it can also, you're welcome, hey. That can also be to our detriment. You know, once we lose that connection, and once we lose that ability to talk to somebody eye to eye, you know, that's really when, you know, we're losing perspective, where you lose that empathy, that ability to understand, you know, how someone else lives, and you know, basically from that.
I mean, I think we're living at an incredibly historical moment in life, and as a generation with all the obstacles that we're faced, which are many, in many ways, there's an odd blessing to that. I think people 100 years will look back at this generation very critically, and I think that we as young people have the opportunity to historically look, to be, you know, study as the generation that, you know, either helped sink the ship or help write it. And I think that that's very inspiring. As overwhelming as that may be, that's the reality of what we're living in right now. And I think that it's up to the new minds and innovators and speakers to get out and do that. And I think it can be a blessing in disguise in many ways. And if we use our voice and our courage and our passion and our intellect, beautiful things can come out of this crisis that we're facing worldwide right now.